I'm going to read Psalm 118. This is part of the texts that Chris is going to be preaching from. One of the texts. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever. Let Israel say, God's steadfast love endures forever. Let the house of Aaron say, God's steadfast love endures forever. Let those who fear the Lord say, God's steadfast love endures forever. Out of my distress, I called on the Lord. The Lord answered me and set me in a broad place. With the Lord on my side, I do not fear. What can mortals do to me? The Lord is on my side to help me. I shall look in triumph on those who hate me. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to put confidence in mortals. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to put confidence in princes. All nations surrounded me. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. They surrounded me on every side. And in the name of the Lord, I cut them off. They surrounded me like bees. They blazed like a fire of thorns. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. I was pushed hard so that I was falling, but the Lord helped me. The Lord is my strength and my might. He has become my salvation. There are glad songs of victory in the tents of righteousness. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. The right hand of the Lord is exalted. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. I shall not die, but I shall live, and recount the deeds of the Lord. The Lord has punished me severely, but he did not give me over to death. Open to me the gates of righteousness, that I may enter through them and give thanks to the Lord. This is the gate of the Lord. The righteous shall enter through it. I thank you that you have answered me and have become my salvation. The stone that the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Save us, we beseech you, O Lord. O Lord, we beseech you, give us success. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. We bless you from the house of the Lord. The Lord is God, and he has given us light. Bind the festal procession with branches up to the horns of the altar. You are my God, and I will give thanks to you. You are my God, and I will extol you. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever.
Thank you, Adam. The other text that I'm going to be drawing from is Mark 11, for anyone who wants to follow along. Good evening, everyone, and happy Palm Sunday. I just want to start by having you picture yourself there on Palm Sunday. Imagining that you're one of the people in the crowd following Jesus into Jerusalem. And first, Jesus tells one of his disciples to get a colt from Bethany, which was a little village just outside of Jerusalem. It's a little unusual. I mean, Jesus walked pretty much everywhere. But then you hear Jesus tell his disciples that when people ask why you're taking the colt, they should simply say, the Lord needs it. Now, those words fall like a thunderbolt on your ears. I mean, it might not sound like much to us today, but this is the first time that Jesus tells people to refer to him as Lord. That whole messianic secret that's been throughout so much of Mark's gospel is for the first time out in the open. Jesus is Lord. And that's the kind of political statement from which there was no going back. And it calls to mind Zechariah 9. See, your king comes to you, triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. And everything that's going on kind of starts to make sense, to fall into place. This is it. This is when Jesus is finally revealing himself as the rightful king of Israel. The Messiah is here at last. Finally, a child of David will be returned to the throne in Jerusalem. And just imagine yourself laying palm branches in the road, quoting from Psalm 118, shouting, Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. And around you, you hear others shouting, blessed is the King of Israel. The crowd grows with every step as you follow him through the streets, as he makes his way to the temple itself, just as the psalm said he would. And Jesus gets to the temple, he enters through its gates, and surveys what's going on in his Father's house. Everyone in the courtyard freezes when this massive crowd enters. The money changers stop to stare. The people selling doves or goats for sacrifice freeze. The worshipers there pause, unsure of what to do, what to say. And Jesus stops in the courtyard, surveys the scene, and without a word, he turns around and marches back the way he came, back toward Bethany. I don't know about you, but I think my first thought would have been something along the lines of, dude, what the Gehenna? Pardon my Aramaic. I mean, this wasn't exactly the march to the horns of the altar that you were expecting, right? So you follow him, still trying to figure out what exactly is going on here. And the next morning, you follow him from Bethany again towards the temple, this time to way less fanfare. And on the way, Jesus stops at a fig tree. And finding plenty of leaves, but no fruit, he curses it, saying, let no one ever eat fruit from you again. Again, this is a little weird because it's spring. It's not harvest time. It's not the season for figs. So this probably confuses you at first. Of course, there are no figs on it. But then it hits you. This wasn't about the fig tree, any more than Jeremiah's prophecies were about almond trees or tipped over cookware. And Jesus marches straight back to the temple. He flips over the tables of the money changers. He drives out the livestock being sold. He chases away those who are selling salvation. And on top of all of that, he physically bars anyone from bringing such things back into the temple. Teaching at the top of his lungs that this was supposed to be a house of prayer for all people. but instead it had become a den of robbers. Now, you could understand if maybe this angered some people. I mean, those money changers had paid good bribes. They had gotten permission from the head priests to be conducting their business there. What right did this upstart Galilean have to be going against the religious leadership? And at sunset, Jesus again leaves the city. And when you see that fig tree the next morning, it's withered and dead. And this time, when Jesus comes back to the temple, those religious leaders are there waiting for him. And they've got some questions for Jesus. Most notably, just who do you think you are? What gives you the right to chase people out of the temple? By what authority do you presume to be contradicting the head priest? And Jesus responds, as he often did, with a question of his own. Was the baptism of John of divine origin or human origin? Now, this one single question basically wins the argument, or at least it should have. Either they acknowledge that John was a prophet, which would mean acknowledging that Jesus was the Messiah, or they say that John was a false prophet, which would absolutely kill their credibility with anybody who is familiar with John's ministry. But these people weren't actually interested in discerning the truth. They don't actually even bother to debate what the correct answer to Jesus's question is. They just ask what answer they need to give to prove Jesus wrong. And neither answer does that. But they don't want to admit that Jesus has won the argument. So they give the ultimate political, wishy-washy non-answer you can give. We're not sure. Now they haven't acknowledged Jesus, but they haven't denied John either, because they haven't said anything at all. And this is a trick that unfortunately still works today among politicians and any bad faith debate that you can think of. So Jesus simply disengages. Well, if you're not going to answer my question, then I'm not going to answer yours. And that's how our chapter ends. Now, this chapter, Mark 11, is really the turning point in the gospel. This is the point where Jesus finally reveals to the public, rather than just a few of his disciples, who he actually is. And this is the point where Jesus' preaching starts to get a whole lot less subtle about critiquing the power structures of his day. And it's also the point where pretty much everyone in power decides that this guy needs to die. Jesus's grand entry into Jerusalem and his march to the temple didn't go how anyone would have expected, except for Jesus himself. And it turns out that when people's expectations are dashed, they can turn pretty nasty. Those same crowds who on Sunday were crying out, Hosanna, were by Friday crying out, crucify him. Those same people who lined the streets to lay their cloaks in the dust for their king to tread on, lined those same streets 5 short days later to watch him drag his cross through that dust. With King of Israel no longer a title of glory, but the accusation against him. We often treat Palm Sunday as a day of celebration, and in some ways it is. But it's also a story of just how fickle the crowds can be, just how selfish those in power truly are, and just how unprepared the world we live in is for an actual encounter with Christ. Because, make no mistake, if Jesus came back today, riding on the clouds of heaven, I believe the church would greet him with shouts of Hosanna. But if he started teaching, if he challenged our economic systems, our social systems, our lifestyle choices, I don't think we'd make it to Friday before people were lining up in the streets shouting, crucify him. Because it's all fun and games until God speaks into your life. And then suddenly it's eye for an eye. We all welcome Jesus when he thinks he's going to lay into our enemies, but invariably, he starts flipping over tables in our hearts. And that initial human reaction is to say, who do you think you are? What gives you the right? The human reaction is not to engage with God in good faith, but rather to try and win the argument. And if that doesn't work, to lash out. That's how it was for the prophets. That's how it was for the early church. That's how it was for Jesus himself. And I wish that I could say it was different today. But it's not. All I can say is thank God the story doesn't end Friday. Thank God our first impulse doesn't have to be our last. Because Easter is right around the corner.